To the On Texas Football channel, the Tuesday night Longhorn Livestream, watching some Texas basketball and talking some Texas football with Bobby Burton, CJ Vogel, and myself, and we appreciate you being there. We'll kind of keep you posted on the score, and you can watch along the game. It's 14-4 bad guys, but we got some football conversations to be had. Guys, how are you? I mean, some breaking news, CJ, out of Ann Arbor, Michigan tonight that, it's a story for all of college football, but certainly for the Longhorns who are looking for some defensive line help, big picture. Spring practice will be what it is and winter workouts, but big picture, some news out of Ann Arbor that could impact the Longhorns and college football fans.
Yeah, it's certainly going to impact Texas next year on the field, but it might also have some implications a little bit later this spring when the second portal window opens up again. Coach Elston, the defensive line coach for the Michigan Wolverines, is expected to join and has officially been hired by the Los Angeles Chargers, according to Adam Schefter, the NFL insider, this past just over an hour ago. So Coach Elston obviously was in charge of a very important position for the Michigan Wolverines. Defensive line was one of their big strengths this past year en route to the NCAA title. And there are a number of prospects right now on that Michigan roster in which have ties to not only him, but Coach Harbaugh and the strength coach, Ben Herbert, as we've seen atop of that chart right there. Thanks, Matthew, for sharing that graphic with us. But it's interesting because we've obviously heard kind of the behind-the-scenes whispers and hoopla surrounding Kenneth Grant, obviously following Texas back, the Texas football accounts, Steve Sarkisian and T'Vondre Sweat. Make of that of what you want, but it is worth monitoring very closely when you take into all accounts the number of guys that have departed from that Michigan program to the NFL, as well as where they're at right now in terms of transfer portal window. I don't expect anything to happen now. Michigan's portal window does close February 23rd, so a little over 2 weeks right now from when Harbaugh took his job in the NFL to when players can still opt into the portal. But I'm looking more towards the spring, that April 15th to 30th window, in which we'll see some real action happen from Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and you said it, CJ and Bobby, the impact, whether the Longhorns grab some players out of the portal from Michigan at some point in the spring window or whatever, but on the field next September, I mean, this is going to be a totally different looking Michigan team because if they don't come to Texas, there's going to be some guys leaving. I think that's fair to say. And obviously, attrition at the coaching staff, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which was their strength. They were the number one defense in the country last year. When you're looking at Texas against Michigan in Ann Arbor on September 7th, these are kind of things you're keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, I think that, Texas is going to try to get a defensive lineman in the portal, period, end of story. Will they get someone as good as Kenneth Grant or Mason Graham, the two defensive tackles at Michigan that could go in the portal? Look, there's probably five. Let's put it this way. That's akin to Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat going in the portal. Just to give you a sense of how good those players are. These aren't just a nice player going in the portal. This will be a first, second round draft pick type situation with both of them. Grant, in fact, could go as high as top 15 in the draft. Graham is probably the better player right now. Just because he's more active, but both of them are elite players and prospects and will be treated as such if they go into the portal. It won't be just Texas going after those two. It'll be everybody around the country. What's interesting, somebody is saying, oh, well, Texas will just NIL them. Well, guess what? This is what people need to understand about NIL. The color of money is the same everywhere. It's green. So it's not they're not gonna get paid more NIL one place necessarily than they will others that are in that same category. It's going to be about recruiting those guys and finding them a place that they want to be at, et cetera. And that's one of the things that Steve Sarkisian's done a great job of, in my opinion, and what needs to be a focus as you go forward. It's not necessarily NIL. NIL will be there because the University of Texas will compete in that vein, okay? But other teams will too. And we've seen that, whether that's USC or Georgia or Alabama or whoever, they will compete. And Oregon, another team. So you got to see what you can do there and be the team that they want to go to ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, you compete for everybody around the country. without a doubt. And, you got to get in that space. But obviously the Longhorns offer, a chance to play at the highest level of the SEC. I'm going to play some big-time games this year. And as you just said, what you saw from Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, the development. But obviously Bo Davis now at LSU. We'll see what Kenny Baker can do on the recruiting trail as well. And, CJ, there's no guarantee that these guys get into the ball. I mean, Sharon Moore could show up and, lock everything down, hire a good staff. We don't know. It's all speculative at this point on the 6th of February. But it's the new age of college football. You follow it when coaches leave, like a Jim Harbaugh, and or at least two of the defensive staff and the strength and conditioning coach, which I think is big, because that's the person the players are closest to during the winter workouts. There's just a natural follow this conversation kind of deal happening.
Yeah, certainly. You mentioned it's no guarantee. And right now, if you're Coach Moore, Sharon Moore over at Michigan, your number one objective right now is to maintain the guys that you have on the roster, to retain them going into not only the spring, but into the fall as well. One of the names that Matt Zanitz over at 24/7 Sports tossed out this afternoon to watch for the Michigan defensive coordinator spot is Wink Martindale, the former Giants defensive coordinator. A big one.
Wink Martindale?
Yep.
Was his dad the game show host? Wink Martindale?
Was he?
No.
I don't know. I've heard of Wink Martindale. I didn't know he was a defensive coordinator. I thought he was a game show host.
He was.
No,
his name is like Dan Martindale, I believe, or something. But he got that nickname because of the game show host. Like as he was coming through, like everybody gets a nickname, right? And they just started calling him Wink, and that became his name at a young age in coaching. But no, he's no relation to the tic-tac-toe game show host. I believe it was Wink Martindale.
Oh my God.
Pretty remarkable. But yeah, that's kind of one of the names that has been flown out recently for the Michigan defensive coordinator search. So as you would expect, Sharon Moore, coming off of the national title run, is going to try to do whatever he can to retain the talent on his roster. And so far he's done a tremendous job at that. And making a splash hire from the NFL would certainly help the Wolverines, in my eyes, keep those guys in Ann Arbor rather than deport for the portal.
Hey guys, tomorrow is National Signing Day. It used to be like the flagship day of the off season. It used to be the biggest day, obviously. Not long ago, you and all three of us have been a part of that when it was the day, and go wall to wall from 7 in the morning until late at night to follow it. Are there breaking stories around it? Not just in Austin, obviously, but around the state, around the country. Is there National Signing Day news that will break tomorrow? I know Terry Bussey, the young kid, the 2A kid that is going to decide between A&M and LSU. That one's top of mind. Are there other stories that fans on the On Texas Football Channel should be watching for tomorrow?
Well, that's at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I believe, right? Terry Bussey out of Timpson will choose between LSU and A&M. Ryan Williams, the wide receiver out of Alabama, is set to go to Alabama still, we believe. I don't know of any big news that is expected to break. Bussey is one of the only guys in the top 100 that hasn't really firmly committed somewhere at this point. Is that what you understand too, CJ?
Yeah, he's probably the biggest name, especially in the state of Texas, that has not, put his name in stone. Tomorrow, Coach Sarkisian will have a press conference at 11 a.m., kind of recapping the class of 24. I know he's talked a little bit following the initial signing day back in December. Now he'll get an update of what it's like, now that everything's done, and he can fully focus back on the 25 class. I'm also eager to see if he kind of digresses a little bit behind the scenes of what's going to happen with his director of player personnel, director of recruiting, and potential GM spot created now in the new world of college football. If we get any kind of intel from him on that's kind of one of the big kind of factors and big points I'm looking for tomorrow as well.
Well, interesting too, because that's a great point, CJ. And for our On Texas Football audience and people viewing, if you have questions because CJ, you'll be at the news conference tomorrow, correct? The availability. So if you have questions that you'd like CJ to ask Coach Steve Sarkisian, we can fire those. But off the top of your mind, CJ, is that where you would start? Like if you had a question for Sark based on, he'll make an opening statement that's pretty general, probably talking about winter workouts and, what's going on campus and what's happening. What are your biggest questions that you want to either ask Coach Sark tomorrow, what you would like to hear based on questions you have going into the spring?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, there's a lot of I don't want to say animosity, but a lot of questions right now about that interior defensive line. How does he feel about that spot right now. We just talked about the potential fallout at Michigan and from the defensive line room following their coach going to the NFL. Texas, we believe, is still in the market for a defensive lineman via the portal this spring. How do you feel about that spot a little earlier, about 2 months, or I guess about a month now from when spring ball is really about to kick up? The other one is what kind of like the approach you take in recruiting is interesting to me, because Sarkisian obviously goes for some really high profile guys, some guys from the state that have made a big name, big programs, winning programs at that. I think I did the math earlier today. There were 8 state championships won by players in the 24 class. Over the last 2 cycles, I believe it's up to 21 state championships won by players in the last 2 recruiting cycles that will be entering the Texas program. Rather, they might already be on campus as an early enrollee or joining officially back in the summer. So really interesting to me, just the approach that they take in the recruiting trail to why a guy might be a guy that they take a look at versus when they potentially go after him. And I think playing from a deep a program back in high school that certainly elevates and plays at a very high level is something that they look at very deeply.
Yeah, and Bobby, that's interesting because Sark clearly, they're looking for talent on the recruiting trail that they're looking for, but they're looking for winners. They want young guys from really good programs. I mean, really good programs are competitive. When you're playing for state championships, it's a year-round industry there in high school football in the state of Texas or wherever you are. That's clearly a flag they're looking for in these players because winning programs, kids from winning programs are winners, and they understand how to compete. They understand what the bar is, and they kind of come in with that DNA.
Yeah, I think a winning player is mostly out of that program that you talk about here. And CJ, we can talk about whether it's Duncanville or North Shore or DeSoto or Allen or one of those teams that Arlington Martin had a great program for years, Lake Travis and Westlake. I'm one of those guys that feels like, we've got to find out where they're trying to go and who they're trying to go after and why. It could be any number of reasons, but I'm looking at the next 24 hours really to your conversation, CJ, about what you want to talk about with Coach Sarkisian. I want to pivot to that a little bit here, and that's this. I mean, the idea that he might hire a GM and or a new director of player personnel. I don't know if he's going to announce that tomorrow or not. I am hearing from behind the scenes that Brandon Harris is likely to be elevated to the GM role, if there is such a role at this point in time. And John Michael Jones is expected to be elevated to the director of player personnel. However, I've only heard that from a couple of different people, not necessarily from Steve Sarkisian's side of things. And so I'm waiting for Sark to say something publicly to kind of tell us what's going to be going on here with his personnel department. I think over the next 24 hours, that's probably the biggest news. And then another thing that is a big news, in my opinion, potentially is exactly what's going on up in Michigan, to your points, guys, about these defensive linemen.
It's interesting to see what questions will be and what questions Sark will answer tomorrow. For the audience, CJ, the GM role, I mean, that's becoming kind of the in word. I mean, it's, you shouldn't beat around the bush with that. It's really what it is, right? You have someone at the top of your organization that is in charge of draft boards, whether it's high school or portal. The head coach can only do so much. There's only so many hours in the day. When you hear the word general manager, GM in high school, or college football right now, what does that mean? What's that role for our audience to understand what that capacity would be for Brandon Harris, say, if he were promoted to that role?
Well, in college football, it's still pretty new. You're still understanding what it's like, and I don't think two places are as similar as it might sound like it is in the NFL. But to me, a general manager is a guy that constructs a roster, whether that be through the portal, whether it be through recruiting. It is your job to understand what the numbers look like and certainly what it means to build a roster from top to bottom. Texas has done a tremendous job of attacking needs that they've seen fit, over the last couple cycles, whether it be defensive back this past offseason, offensive line when the staff first got here, and now we're looking at defensive line as a place where Texas kind of needs to bolster their position room. That's going to be, in my eyes, really the role of a general manager, is identifying these strengths and weaknesses and then finding ways that they can pursue guys, whether it be, again, in the portal or in the high school ranks, to fill that need. And certainly kind of circle guys that might fit, again, in the world of NIL, how it might be a pursuit for the staff to go about it. So I don't know. I'm eager to see how Sarkisian defines it tomorrow if he does talk about it, because, again, I think it's an evolving position right now in the world of college football, and it could be completely different from what we understand it to be at Texas versus Ole Miss versus Washington or any of these other schools across the country.
Well, Bobby, you've been around this longer than anybody. To what CJ just said about roster construction, right? I mean, just if you take the NFL example, Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco works with John Lynch, right? He's his GM. And, Kyle kind of handpicked John Lynch when he came in to be the head coach, because they see football the same. If you're Sark and you promote Brandon Harris, or you had, Billy Glasscock before, you want someone running that on a day-to-day basis that sees football like you do, and, looking for the big humans, looking for the speed, looking for the type of players you want. But at the same time, they have the time to dive into, 2-3 years down the road, and where do we need to be? What positions are we going to be thin at a couple years down the road here? Where are we looking at? Where are we going to be portal heavy? Those kind of things that, if you're Steve Sarkisian, you gather with your GM throughout the weeks and as you go. But that's the person in charge of roster construction, not just for this year, but for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, my piece on this is a little bit different. I don't know that the GM in college football is going to mean what the GM means in pro football. And for us to think that it might, I think, is the wrong way to look at it.
Okay.
I'm not trying to diminish the position or the role or what have you. I just think that, Sark, if he wanted a true GM, and this is, again, not taking anything away from Brandon Harris or whomever, but he could go hire a guy that's been a GM of an NFL team. But it's not the same position. That's number one. And two, Sark is the alpha. He's not looking for a co-alpha, as Ray Peters here puts in the chat, and I completely agree with him. He's looking for someone to execute what he wants to do. And that's not the way the NFL works. The NFL works, the president or the owner generally hires the general manager and the president and the coach in two different capacities. They are in different silos that kind of meet in the middle. Whereas in college football, the head coach is the man and everything else flows down from there. So I think when we think of general manager, to CJ's point and to yours, Aaron, when I first think of that term, I think of it in the NFL capacity or in Major League Baseball's capacity, right? Where these guys make a lot of the player moves and the coaches kind of just coach. Well, that's not how it's going to work at Texas, as long as Steve Sarkisian's the head coach. That doesn't mean that they won't oversee player personnel. They won't, to your point, Aaron, try to drum up who's who and all that stuff. But it'll be still top down with Steve Sarkisian, the head man in charge. That's the reality of it for me. I mean, and what we need to look at as it goes forward with Texas. They're not looking to hire I don't think, some experienced NFL exec that's going to be heading up, the general manager's job like you would at I don't want to say the Dallas Cowboys, because that's a horrible, horrible reference or example. One of the more typical ones, like, I don't know, the Indianapolis Colts or something. They have a GM and they have a coach, right? That's not the way it is. So we'll see how that all works out. But I think that Texas, Sark already has a chief of staff. He's a piece. He's a piece of the puzzle. I think Brandon Harris will be a piece of the puzzle. I think John Michael Jones. If Sark decides to bring more in, though, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe someone that does have that kind of gravitas or something as a piece of the puzzle. But I definitely think no matter what you call these roles, it's going to be top-down leadership from Sark in college football.
Well, I think, CJ, that goes to the question of for Sark tomorrow, the availability is, what is the title and what is that role? And what does that mean to your program, right? I mean, that's, as we kind of, try to speculate about it, I'm sure Sark, as we've gotten to know and cover, he would be open about that, of what that role entails. And obviously losing Billy Glasscock to the Ole Miss Rebels. I mean, that's a natural conversation and question, and it's a fair question because I think we're talking about it, and I think our audience and thinks about, okay, what does that actually mean? What's that do? I do think your words, roster construction, are probably the biggest part of it. And yes, Sark will always be the alpha as far as how he wants that roster constructed. But there's only so many hours in the day to focus on those kind of things. You need a staff at this point because the calendar comes at you really hard and fast. CJ, other conversations that you think will be had tomorrow with Sark about where they are, the 18 early enrollees that are on campus, the 8 portal additions. I'm sure there'll be some talk about what they've seen from those guys early on. I mean, that's 26 new players that are on campus that they're trying to assimilate and keep the culture that they had built. I'm sure that'll be a conversation tomorrow.
I'm absolutely looking forward to what Sarkisian has to say about the new additions to campus, not only from the 24 class, but also from the portal, because you're adding a wealth of talent and a wealth of experience across the board at a number of key positions that will be on the field immediately for Texas next fall. So that's going to be really interesting to see how they've been acclimated to the Texas football program. Obviously, we've talked about that culture that Texas has instilled over the last couple of seasons, whether it be a Jalen Ford or a Jordan Whittington or Roshan Johnson, whoever it might be, who are now going to be those guys to step up and take leadership. We've had some notes and nuggets over the last week or so about guys that we've heard step up, but to hear from Sarkisian's a little bit different, and I'm excited to really get an idea of what that's like from him. And then also Sarkisian and his staff have been on the road for probably about 2.5 weeks now. I'm sure he'll be happy finally to kick his feet up and relax, for about a week or two more before really getting into spring ball mode going forward. But I'm really, really eager to hear it from Sarkisian himself, because there's a lot of change and progression that's happened since Texas lost to Washington in the Sugar Bowl to where we are now.
Hey, CJ, for me, would you please ask him what he's thinking about moving forward? And so what I mean by that is, you and I and Jerry have been talking about this a little bit, how he's got some visits lining up for, mid-March, like the March 22nd weekend. Is that right? Like, right. Ask him about his plans for how he's changing that sort of stuff. The other thing I think he's going to announce this week or tomorrow will probably be the spring practice schedule. They usually do that around this time of the year. I'm hearing that there might be a little change in that this year. Spring practice might actually start after spring break. The last 3 years, I believe, it started before spring break. So I think they might start it the week after spring break. And then, of course, they've already announced the date for the spring game. That's going to be April 20th. But those are things that they also might announce. Hey, guys, before we go forward, I need to do a read here for our friends at Texas Electricity Ratings. For those of y'all living in Texas and in the major cities with deregulated electricity like Dallas and Houston, you understand that the deregulated electricity market can be confusing. Texas Electricity Ratings is a shopping website that lets you compare prices, read customer reviews, and find a good electricity that fits your needs. It also filters out a lot of the gimmicky plans on websites like Power to Choose that trick customers into expensive bills. So if you're in the market for a new electricity plan, shop TexasElectricityRatings.com/OTF for all your electricity needs. Hook them from the folks at Texas Electricity Ratings.
Good stuff right there. We appreciate those folks right there. Bobby, I know Jerry had some breaking, or at least reported news today about the recruiting trail. As Jerry on Coffee and Football, great to have him back on the On Texas Football channel. What was Jerry reporting today?
Yeah, he went by Lufkin. He's doing some. He's on the road this week, going to. I think he may do his show tomorrow morning from the car. So everybody be aware of that. He's on the road visiting high schools. He went by and saw Lufkin's Zion Williams, a big defensive tackle, 6'4", 280 so pounds. Jerry really thinks he's a tremendous prospect. I talked to Jerry a little bit tonight. Zion is a guy that was, wooed by everybody in the country, but it's sounding like it's going to come down to Texas, LSU, A&M, and TCU right now. LSU, of course, Bo Davis was recruiting him for a year for Texas before he went to LSU. On that January 20th junior day for the University of Texas, Williams actually went to LSU. In the time since, Steve Sarkisian has gone to see him, as well as Blake Gideon. on a single visit. And then Kenny Baker, the second day he was on the job, went and saw Williams as well. And the story that Jerry tells that Williams told him is that Baker, guys, he went in there to visit with Williams and started asking Williams some quick topic questions and really wanting to get to know him. And Baker took a notepad with him and was jotting down what Williams said were the answers. And Williams said he didn't realize it at first, and then all of a sudden it was happening. And in retrospect, he said that was pretty cool. That's the only coach that brought in a notepad to write down what he was saying. But Baker and Williams trying to get a relationship going there. He is the cousin, of Jamarcus McFarland. Aaron, you'll remember that name, the former Oklahoma defensive lineman. He is now the defensive line coach at TCU. And so TCU's in there as well. But just from hearing Jerry talk today, and he thinks it's Texas and LSU, A&M and TCU also involved as well.
All right. And look at the great picture right there that Matt's put up. Big old boy, big lower base for sure. Obviously could fill out in the top, but man, that's a good looking athlete right there. The high 4-star Zion Williams, that the Longhorns and everybody on the recruiting trail there with Jerry. And somebody, I saw a chat that came in that said Jerry's back in the war room / car. Jerry's back on the road. There he is. There's the honey badger. He puts a lot of miles on those vehicles. I know that. Running around, doing what he does only is better, better than anybody else as we get this thing going. Steve Sarkisian will have an availability tomorrow. We're kind of taking your questions and thoughts on what that's going to look like, what the conversations are, the early enrollees. And I think it's safe to say, CJ, questions about, guys who are taking that next step, right? Guys that, there's a lot of attrition here. I mean, as fun as 12-2 was, and trip to the Final Four, Big 12 championship, a lot of the core of that team, a lot of the core of the culture, a lot of plays made, catches made, plays made on defense, moving on. I'll be eager to hear what Sark says about the guys that have already been in the program that are maybe taking that next step forward in their mind.
Yeah, one spot that's going to be really interesting to me this fall, and we've talked about it a few times before, but linebacker to me, you're replacing Jalen Ford, a guy who for the last 2 seasons has been in contention to really be a first team all-conference guy. Obviously, 2 years ago, he was a guy that was a runner-up essentially to the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. He was kind of that heartbeat of the defense as we've seen. You have Anthony Hill returning. You expect him to take a little bit of a leap going into his true sophomore season. But what are you going to get next to him? Is that going to be David Bendo taking over that role full-time? You added Kendrick Blackshear from Alabama. He's more of a run-stuffing guy as well. What about Leonga Lafau? He's kind of that guy that I think could carve out a pretty nice role for himself in year 2, but it's a bit of a question mark right now because I think you do have that one guy solidified in, and that's Anthony Hill. Going into spring ball, it's going to be David Bendo right next to him, but can you rely on him in pass coverage? Can you rely on him in a third down situation? What about Mo Blackwell? How does that room really gel and mesh together? So that'll be a spot, a little way too early look ahead at spring football. I know it's only February 6th, and we're out here sweating a basketball game on a Tuesday night, but that's always been a top of my mind since the departure of Jalen Ford because he just did so much for you, and he cleaned up a lot, not only in the passing game but also in the run game, in which it wasn't always Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy in that front line making plays in the run game. Jalen Ford was very successful in fitting run holes and gaps. So that's going to be my next question: is does Texas feel like they are going to have enough success and production from that linebacker spot to replicate what they were able to do in 2023?
Bobby, that goes back to the roster construction conversation we had a little bit ago. Anticipating what he just said about linebacker, the last recruiting cycle, not the current one, they had a heck of a linebacker class, right? I mean, Anthony Hill was the headliner, but Darian Gillette and Samaje Burrell and Leonga Lafau, and I mean, they really attacked that position with Jeff Choate and the linebackers, and obviously Johnny Nansen has taken over there, and it's going to be interesting how those roles define, right? I mean, I know PK likes to play 3 linebacker or 4 linebackers at a time sometimes, and they're kind of the hybrid guys, right? That positionless kind of player. How do all these guys evolve, and what are their roles? The true traditional linebacker / and then the edge guys that can rush and come after it. That's something I'm interested to seeing in the spring, is how they weaponize these individual linebackers as they develop, because that was a really good recruiting class at that position.
Couldn't agree more with you, Aaron, and kind of took the words out of my mouth a little bit, actually. I think that CJ, you mentioned LaFau. You mentioned some other guys. How about Darian Gillette?
Yeah, man.
Yep.
What an athlete.
I mean, we're waiting to see what he can do now that he's been a year healthy.
Yep.
Right. And been in the program. That's a name that I think we need to see. And he is an off-ball linebacker, Aaron, to your point. Samaje Burrell, got to go through his first spring practice with Texas. He wasn't around for spring like Leonga LaFau last year. And so Cecilia Khan is still playing edge, I think, instead of linebacker. So we'll see how all of this turns out. But my initial impression right now is to wait and see, particularly about Gillette along with LaFau. I think those two are the ones that, if you want to circle, soft circle right now, those are the ones. Hey, Edmund Lee has a good super chat here, guys. And I was trying to think about it as I saw it a couple minutes ago. I want to ask you guys this. Is this the wildest coaching carousel between the colleges and pros you have seen in years? Is it? I mean,
Definitely.
Is it really?
I'd say ever.
Yeah.
I would say ever. I mean, when you consider that 3 of the 4 that were in the Final Four moved, and then on one single, 36-hour period, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, and Nick Saban were out for whatever their reason. I mean, those are the 3 legendary coaches of my era of college football, and CJ's and yours, Bobby. I mean, those are legendary coaches. So absolutely. I mean, the changeover has been stunning, and, just huge names. I mean, these are the 3 of the 4 coaches who played for the national championship, CJ, and then some of the best coaches in pro football too. I don't know that I've seen anything like it in all my days of covering football.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was going to talk about. You arguably have the greatest of all time at each level of football, saying, they're no longer going to be coaching the team that they've won so many championships with moving forward. Also in the NFL, Mike Vrabel, who had a very successful run with the Tennessee Titans moving on as well. That's an interesting one to me. You go back and look at some of the schools that kept their coaches and think, for their fan base, it's probably not what you expected, but also adds to the craziness. Obviously the Cowboys with Mike McCarthy, but then you look closer to home in SEC, Arkansas with Pittman, and then obviously Napier at Florida. A lot of those coaching kind of circles late in the season were kind of thinking this might be some moves that happened after the season, and yet Texas is going into the SEC right now with the same head coach that brought them to the college football playoff, the only one, like you mentioned, Aaron, that is returning from the top 4. And you're looking at a schedule right now in which there was a lot of coaching turnover. Obviously, we start at Michigan, but let's not even talk about Kentucky, right? Their coach tried to leave for A&M, who also is having a brand new, head coaching hire and staff come in with Mike Elko. So there's a lot going on in terms of whether or not those coaches will even be there by the time that Texas plays them this fall, let alone what's happened already this offseason.
Without a doubt. And Bobby, you've been around it longer than CJ or I, even not to age you, but have you ever seen anything like we've seen this, last month and a half?
I didn't look at it in that perspective. I hadn't really the idea that Belichick, Saban, and Carroll all went boom, boom, boom. And I realized that with Saban and Carroll because those were 2 of Steve Sarkisian's mentors, right? And sometimes I have such a micro or myopic view, I guess, of what's going on with Texas because I'm so concerned with Texas, right? And I hadn't really thought about that. Then you add the fact that the national championship coach moves on,
yeah,
right? In Jim Harbaugh. I would say that I think I've seen more blue bloods leave than in years past. There weren't, Michigan and Alabama, probably the only 2 in that regard. A&M, obviously, Washington in that kind of category. There weren't as many college high-profile jobs as I've seen before.
Yeah, there was a couple of years ago when Notre Dame, LSU, USC,
Florida
all turned over. Florida,
Yep.
all turned over. I think it was for just the visceral, as we said, just those names. I mean, because it leads to this question, guys. Kirby Smart right now is the best coach in college football by resume. Who's second? Who's the next? Who's the next
It was
guy?
Dabo up until the last couple of seasons, but now that they've kind of hit a snag, I'm right there with you, Aaron. Who is that next guy?
Yeah. I mean, with Harbaugh moving on and handing it to Sharon Moore, with Saban obviously stepping aside. It's a void. It's a huge question. Like who's going to step into that role, and become that next great coach. I mean, we're just so used to Saban being there, right? And Saban and his proteges, obviously Kirby Smart has developed. Jim Harbaugh has been building the program. Ryan Day at Ohio State, you would mention, but we know what his failing has been, what his limitation has been,
right,
and where he's at. That would be a fair name to throw out there. But Lincoln Riley at USC has not gotten it done like people thought he would. Brian Kelly at LSU is very established. He's won a lot of football games and left Notre Dame as the winningest coach in that program's history, and he's trying to get LSU going. But man, it's a short list right now of coaches that you'll in college football that you have to look at and say this is a elite coach. It's Kirby Smart, and then who? And that's another part of Texas bringing back 70% of their production and most of their coaching staff. There's a chance for Sark to kind of step into that conversation, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You look at Nick Saban stepping back from coaching. He was always the guy that people were chasing, right? It was always Coach Smart right on his heels. Well, now it's who's going to be on Coach Smart's heels. And right now there's been a lot of guys that have knocked on that doorstep to being a national championship, kind of perennial contender, yet have come up a bit short. Lincoln Riley's had his faults, most likely because of the guys that he's had in his staffing room more so than anything on the field. But it's interesting to see now that Sarkisian has that opportunity to step into that with a nice little run to the college football playoff year in and year out. And the other point I wanted to mention, if you go back to the coaching turnover at the head coaching spot, a lot has happened, right? The coordinators in the SEC, that's another conversation because a lot of coaching turnover at the coordinating spots alone. Texas might be one of the few teams, and not only in the SEC, but the entire country, that kept all three head coach, defensive coordinator, and offensive coordinator that are going to be in a position to compete at a very high level in 2024. I'm going to have to do some deep diving in that because that just caught my interest a little bit right there.
I want to say this. Next year is use it or lose it for Ryan Day at Ohio State.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that think he has 5 first-round draft picks on this team next year.
The team's stacked.
Yeah. And if he doesn't get it done next year, when's he going to get it done?
Right.
And so he's come close. He had Georgia on the ropes 2 years ago, guys. Right? I mean, Marvin Harrison doesn't go down. They may beat Georgia and then end up winning the national championship.
Yeah, I mean, that's the conundrum of Ryan.
He is the closest of all of those players, of all of those people right now.
I agree with that. I mean, he's never lost a Big Ten game to a team not named Michigan. I mean, he's undefeated against the rest of the Big Ten. They won the Rose Bowl a couple years ago. They almost beat Georgia. You said that with C.J. Stroud, but as history moves forward, everybody looks back and says, well, how did you not win with C.J. Stroud? How did you not beat Michigan? And now do we think Bill O'Brien is the answer for their offense? I mean, we're also hearing Bill O'Brien maybe is a candidate for the Boston College job potentially at the head level, which is interesting.
That would be the best thing that could happen to Ohio State.
It truly would.
I'm not kidding. I mean, if anybody can stub their toe, it's Bill O'Brien. So
yeah, as a Houston Texans fan, I can vouch for that. That would be huge if he, Buckeye fans were Bill O'Brien. Really, we're bringing him in. Well, he's going to take the Boston College job. Great, that's great. Let's move forward.
I might write his buyout check if I were them. I mean, that was a bad hire.
Yeah, well, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a strange time, and we also know the conversation is out there, CJ, of college coaches that are scurrying to get to the NFL if they can because of the wild west that's happening and the 24/7, 365-day-a-year calendar that's happening right now. That it's almost too much. I mean, a guy like Jeff Hafley at Boston College, word out of UCLA's Chip Kelly's been kind of begging to get out of college football and get to the NFL. I mean, that's why I think we saw last Friday the SEC and the Big Ten announce their alliance, their partnership about. And at some point in this calendar year, there has to be a real serious conversation among the power schools and conferences about the calendar, how they handle a 12-team playoff on top of transfer portal, on top of everything that we're already looking at. I mean, it's really not sustainable, I think is a fair way to put it.
Yeah,
Not at all.
it's a tough spot right now. Go ahead, Bobby.
I was going to say thanks to UT boy for this. It's not sustainable. Let me ask y'all this. We just started talking about the Big Ten, right? And we know a lot about Texas and Oklahoma and how with them going into the SEC and what we think that looks like. The Big Ten has 4 teams coming in, right? They've got Lincoln Riley and Dan Lanning that are both going to have upper half level talent coming into that league at the very least, upper quartile. What do you think?
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. I think
Michigan,
Dan Lanning has a chance.
State, and then who is the 3rd most talented team? Penn State? Are USC and Oregon going to be 4 and 5 in that league, or 2, 3, 4 and 5?
I bump Oregon up, but yeah.
I might put Oregon right behind Ohio State right now.
I would too.
In front of Michigan.
Yes, this year.
Until we know what their roster looks like based on the spring transfer portal and everything we talked about to start the Tuesday night live stream tonight. Yeah, I think because Oregon and CJ, you can speak to, they loaded up. I mean, they've loaded up a quarterback. Jabbar Muhammad landed there. I mean, Dan Lanning is pushing the accelerator, kind of like Sark, to fill the holes and try to go win a national championship, even if they're in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I got to say this before CJ jumps in. Bill O'Brien is like putting a governor on your race car.
Restrictor plate.
Best way I could put it. CJ, go ahead. Your comment.
Sorry, my internet was going a little slow right there. No, I like what Oregon's doing at the quarterback position specifically. I think they're kind of stockpiling some guys right there at the quarterback room, in which, I've yet to really see that stockpile at Michigan. We've talked about the trenches at Michigan. Well, Dan Lanning and Oregon's doing a very similar approach this past year and beyond. I think that Oregon in the trenches is going to fit right on in with the style of play that you see in the Big Ten. And I think that they have enough speed in the offense to get the field stretched vertically a little bit, in which isn't so common in the Big Ten. So I like their fit in that conference, and I think that they're going to have enough talent to compete for a title right away. I think that they're going to be right there with Ohio State. If I had to put them, on paper with Penn State, what's the biggest differentiator to me? It's guys that can create big explosive plays. Oregon has them. Penn State, not necessarily. That might change, obviously, with the change in coordinator at Penn State, but it all then falls back on the quarterback, in which you're going to be replacing Bo Nix, but it's Dante Moore, the former 5-star right there. Austin Novosad was a highly rated recruit. I would take both of them right now over what I saw from Drew Aller this past year, in which it really didn't look like Penn State had any faith in him to throw any type of football pass. So I like Oregon a lot in the Big Ten. I think they're a great fit, and I think they're going to be in that conversation right there with Oregon State. And if Michigan can figure it out, it's going to be the 3 of them moving forward for me.
Hey, CJ, let's go into this real quick. Antoine is asking, is a UT leading for Chad Woodfork? That's a big defensive end.
A little recruiting time, huh? I'm tired of us talking about some hypothetical.
Okay, I want to get in because we have some questions here I wanted to get to for
good.
Aaron.
No, definitely. I like Chad Woodfork a lot. He was on campus over the summer. He really took a liking to seeing Kelvin Banks kind of being what he called a star in action at practice. That really resonated with him early on, late August or late January last year when he first visited. He was back on campus again for the junior day. Texas does have a slight edge there. Again, the connection to Kelvin Banks, his former high school teammate. I believe he was a freshman when Banks was a junior. My grade math isn't necessarily up to par right there, but Banks was certainly someone that he looked up to and held in high regard. So being able to see how he's been transitioned to the world of college football, plus the Texas staff has really made him a priority and made him feel like that following the Texas Junior Day. I think Texas is in a tremendous spot for Chad Woodfork at the moment. I would say that they lead right now.
Good stuff right there. And your question certainly welcome here on the Tuesday night live stream, brought to you by Texas Electricity Ratings. Grant or Graham could still hit the portal now and enroll right. So if they were to hit the portal, it would most likely be in the spring window, correct? Thank you. Hi, Boo. I'm Boo Corrigan. Those are the 2 defensive tackles of Michigan, correct?
Yes, they are. And I tell you what, Aaron, I think that it would most likely be in the spring window. We've talked about this, right? But when a head coach leaves, you have 30 days to enter the portal. But even if a guy like Kenneth Graham or Mason Graham entered the portal right now, they couldn't enroll at the school of their choice because school has already started. So they might as well go ahead, keep working out at their own school, keep trying to get better, etc. Utilize all those opportunities to just become a better player, and then get through most of spring ball and make a decision.
Right.
And so I think that's what we're going to wait for. And I think Boo Corrigan is right there. And that has to do simply with the idea that we're not going to see a lot of movement now until that April 15th timeframe. I will say this: don't be surprised if we start hearing some guys pre-announce that they're going in the portal by April 15th.
Wow.
So think about that, because they did that back in the fall and the winter months, right, CJ? Like there were 20, 30 guys that say, hey, I'm going in the portal when it opens.
Yep, absolutely.
So don't be surprised if that happens, but I'm not saying it'll happen with either Grant or Graham or another defensive lineman Texas might like. But that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that could be from anybody in the country as well. So a lot to keep an eye on for the portal, not just at Michigan, though Michigan is the hot topic right now, as we've talked about.
Well, because they're stocked with players, and obviously their coach left, and a lot of their defensive staff are now leaving. Strength and conditioning coaches, we mentioned, are leaving. And, Sharon Moore, I'm assuming, his mantra is let's run it back. Let's do this again. Let's not, just because Jim Harbaugh's gone, let's have some pride in Michigan. Let's go win another national championship. But as we were talking about how we power rank and hierarchy, the Big Ten, if you're a Michigan season ticket holder coming off a national title, you love their home schedule. But if you're Sharon Moore in your first year and you play Texas September 7th, you play USC on September 21st, and you also have a home game with Oregon. You got to go to Ohio State. They got to go to Washington to play in Seattle. They host Michigan State. I mean, their schedule is loaded. Of the schools coming in from the West Coast, they play 3 of the 4. I mean, they play Oregon, Washington, and USC in year one. And Sharon Moore's first year, on top of playing that early September game with the Longhorns, who might be preseason number 1 or 2, behind Georgia. So yeah, Sharon Moore's got work to do. He's going to. I mean, he knows that schedule's coming. He's going to be working to keep as many of those dudes as he can. Can he becomes a huge question, because the vultures will be circling without a doubt.
And the other question is Michigan is not a team that is traditional. They've hit the portal, but they did it for guys that weren't big names per se. They don't necessarily. I think Michigan's that's a great point, Aaron, that he's going to try to circle the wagons like you're talking about. I just don't know if he's going to be able to do it. I don't know if anybody, including Jim Harbaugh, would have been able to do it unless some things really changed. Yeah. Because Michigan has been – I mean, look, Michigan lost its top basketball player to Kansas because of NIL. I mean, Michigan is notoriously slow in that regard. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL.
Wow. Well, that's interesting, because a lot of people just assume the NCAA was coming after him, but at the same time –
it could be both, right? I mean, it could be more than one factor.
Oh, 100%. It can be multifactorial without a doubt. But yeah, if you're not keeping up in the space of NIL, you're going to lose out, because there's a narrative you could portray that this is Jim Harbaugh kind of semi-handing it to Sharon Moore the way Ryan Day was handed it from Urban Meyer, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. This is different in your mind.
Absolutely. They don't have the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
They don't have the quarterback stack. It's an upper-class roster, or it was. I don't think they have. Now, they have some lingering guys around there, especially they got some dudes on defense. Graham is a guy, no doubt. Kenneth Grant is a dude. Will Johnson, the corner, big time.
Baller.
Like top 10 pick, big time. They got 3 dudes on defense. So there are some pieces to that, Aaron, is what I'm saying. But it's not like Ohio State where the roster was littered with them. They were most of the guys at Michigan are upper class guys.
Yeah, but they were about that. Yeah, and when Stoops walked away from Oklahoma and handed it to Lincoln Riley, it was stacked, and he was running the offense. And you could play it that way, but it does feel different that Harbaugh left off to the NFL and is taking a lot of that staff with him. Now, when Lincoln CJ left to go to USC, he took a bunch of staff with him, a bunch of coaches to the college level, and he took Caleb Williams, which didn't help in the incoming Brett Venables. But so this, you could argue it could be a little bit, because Ryan Day with Urban Meyer seemed pretty seamless, except for the Michigan game. Brett Venables came into a pretty limited roster, and they went 6-6 in year one. I don't know if Sharon Moore tumbles to that, but it's a challenge more like, Brett Venables faced after Lincoln Riley left than I think what we're looking at at Ohio State.
Yeah, the biggest thing to me is if you have your quarterback. And I think Sarkisian experienced that year one here when you were flipping back and forth, obviously neither of which Hudson Card or Casey Thompson stayed healthy for the duration of that season. But if you have your quarterback, you're able to really kind of basically cover it up. Quarterbacks are makeup for a bad roster. And at times I thought Caleb Williams was able to do that for USC in Lincoln Riley's first year at USC. Dylan Gabriel, a talented quarterback, not a game-changing quarterback, and that's why you saw Oklahoma kind of stumble in the sense that they did year one under Brent Venables. Obviously, Texas, as we mentioned, did not have that game-changing quarterback. They had talented quarterbacks, but they weren't the guys that you could sit out there and say, go win me a football game in the sense that you would see with some of these game-changing guys. So with Michigan and the way that it pertains to them, is Alex Orji that guy? I don't know. I mean, who's going to be that guy for them if he's even not the quarterback? That's going to be the big question mark, because you talk about the talent that's leaving, you talk about the coaching staff that's leaving. What's next? If you know that the quarterback is going to be a guy that you've kept in-house over the last couple of years with the same offensive coordinator, he's got to be that guy that elevates your play.
What about all those offensive linemen that are leaving and the style of play? They don't throw the ball.
Yeah.
They were a hammer offense, right? I mean, it was just like a vice that just kind of ground you down.
Yeah, if they don't have the defense, it's really hard to play that style of offense.
Yeah, the defense and the because one of the strengths of Michigan last year was, 6-7 deep at the offensive line. They would just line up and rotate guys and just beat you up. And by the fourth quarter, you were worn down. They didn't. What was the game against Penn State where they ran the ball, the entire second half at Penn State? Yeah, and they never threw the ball. At some point you run out of those guys, and your quarterback has to win you a football game. That was a rare group that and it took 9 years for Jim Harbaugh to build that special group that could beat you that way. Jim Harbaugh is now gone, and that's another big factor. I mean, one of the reasons that a lot of people think the LA Chargers are going to be really good in year one is that guy's ability to motivate, get the best out of players, find the ceiling for each guy. It's still unknown if Sharon Moore can do that.
I agree.
Yeah, I think one thing that we haven't even mentioned is Zach Zinter, Michigan's best offensive lineman, was out for the year about 8 weeks into the season, and it just didn't matter. So,
no,
credit to them.
No doubt. All right, how many portal receivers does Texas take after the 24 season? People are already playing chess here. They're going down the road. I like it. We're moving, but it's fair because Isaiah Bond's coming here to go to the pros. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and that is the way. I'll say this, and you guys can go more deep dive. It seems to me within 3.5 years, it doesn't feel like Steve Sarkisian is going to have a hard time recruiting receivers at Texas. I mean, at Alabama, he didn't have a hard time with it. It just feels like that's a position, quarterbacks and receivers, that he's always going to be able to attract.
I bet he takes one next year.
I was thinking that, yep.
I think one, because look, big-time receivers in waiting in Austin right now, in my opinion, big-time receivers. Jonte Cook and Ryan Wingo. Okay? So the other ones are good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying DeAndre Moore is all of a sudden a bet. I mean, I'm talking about potential first-round type guys. Okay? Matthew Golden will likely be back next year. Mm-hmm. CJ, you wrote this article on Texas Football today that I thought was terrific. It's a pipeline look, Aaron, of what was going on, and it was at the wide receiver and tight end. And I could see them taking one guy that they thought was maybe a first-round draft pick from the portal. Otherwise, I think they're gonna start bringing in more of the younger guys that they think are legitimate big-time players and start breathing some life into them. That would be my take. Not 3 or 4 like they did this year, but 1.
Well, and 3 or 4 this year was to replace the experience, but also, as Rod Babers, our great friend who's recovering from his oral surgery, would tell you, I mean, hope's not a strategy, right? I mean, you hope Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook and these guys are ready. If you're trying to win a national championship, win an SEC championship, you want some proven players, and that's what they went out and got. And if Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore and these guys develop, all the better, and they compete and push the likes of Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond and Silas gold. I mean, these are good problems. But yes, you were going to go get production in that receiver room to replace Xavier Worthy, a 3-year starter, A.D. Mitchell, a proven player, and obviously Jordan Whittington.
Yeah, that was certainly the approach, and I'm with you. I think at this point, you go fit a guy in which you hope can, take your wide receiver room from good to great. And I think Texas's wide receiving floor is going to be very good for the next couple of seasons by the way that they've been recruiting. And not to mention, all these guys going to the NFL are just more notches under the belt of Chris Jackson, who is going to be, kind of lined up with other recruiting coaches in the country when going after these high-profile 4- and 5-star wide receivers. So I'm excited for it, and I think all Texas fans should be excited for it because, as I said on that article Bobby mentioned earlier, I mean, the future's very bright here, and at no point should Sarkisian ever have a lack of riches at this position as a result of what he's done in the past, what he's doing right now at Texas, and the way in which he's recruiting for the future. It's very bright.
Bobby, let's tell them about Texas electricity ratings one more time, and we can certainly take your chats and super chats if you've got them before we wrap up here on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, for anyone shopping for electricity in the deregulated areas of Texas, TexasElectricityRatings.com is the best place to find a great electricity plan for your household. For starters, it filters out the dangerous and gimmicky plans from providers that are all hat and no cattle when it comes to your monthly bill. You can shop by rate, but also by an average bill feature that actually takes into account seasonal usage to give you a real number and not some placeholder. So if you're looking for a new electricity plan, check out TexasElectricityRatings.com/OTF for the best options available. Hook 'em from the guys at TexasElectricityRatings.com. Thank you for your sponsorship each and every Tuesday of the live stream.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. All right, as we've said, to start, we talked about Michigan. Their defensive line coach is moving on to the NFL following Jim Harbaugh. That means the defensive coordinator, D-line coach, and strength and conditioning coach will be headed to the NFL. I did see it interesting that maybe Jim Harbaugh's son is not going to follow him to the Chargers. He may take a different gig. Maybe the Seattle Seahawks are trying to bring him in. Interesting that maybe he won't follow Dad, but I thought that was kind of an interesting subplot. Also, Steve Sarkisian does have a news conference availability tomorrow to talk about National Signing Day, in which we don't think much will happen. Here it is. Coach Sark has announced the following promotions within our recruiting and player personnel staff. There you go. We just talked about this and previewed it earlier. Bobby said he had heard some of this was coming, and now here it is from the program's official Twitter account. Brandon Harris, now your general manager. John Michael Jones, now director of player personnel. Taylor Searles, Stacey Searles' daughter, correct? Will be the director of recruiting. Kendall Perry, director of recruiting operations. Thank you, Matt, for putting those up as that breaks here during our Tuesday night live stream. And you alluded to it, Bobby, and I'm assuming that's out tonight to what you said, CJ, to be able for Sark to elaborate and talk about that more tomorrow and what those roles mean.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to see how it's defined within the walls of Moncrief. Obviously, I thought Bobby hit the nail on the head. The head man is always going to be Steve Sarkisian as long as he is at Texas. But what kind of roles in what is the job going to be of the general manager here at Texas? It's going to be interesting to see how it's defined by him. Obviously, I don't think it's any coincidence that Brandon Harris's name is listed first there. There's a hierarchy of what's going to be happening inside the walls of Moncrief, specifically in the recruiting world. But what does that mean? Obviously, I like that Texas kept everything in-house. I think there's going to be a lot of good continuity there. And by the sense of that, Texas has had no shortage of success on the recruiting trail. Keeping the same personnel, as we've talked about, has been important not only on the field but behind the scenes as well. So that's going to be a lot to learn about from Sarkisian tomorrow.
Hey guys, we'll hear Sark talking about general manager, what that means, what that role is defined as for him and within his program. I'm just curious because this is all brand new. The whole idea of a general manager. Do we know what flipped that? Is this UCLA did it and all of a sudden now it just becomes an acceptable label, or I don't know. Was there I think
it's a way to get some guys higher pay that probably deserve it.
Okay.
First of all, that have kind of bled for the program. I mean, Brandon Harris has been here since the start with Sark. And when Bo Davis was, left for LSU, Brandon Harris is the one he wanted to go on the road with. Okay. John Michael Jones has been here for almost a decade, I think. I think he's been through 2 or 3 different coaches, and he is one of the guys that really helped get the Texas walk-on program even off the ground. He's been helping the offensive staff for a number of years now, including Steve Sarkisian, in player personnel type situations. So now he's going to have the overall player personnel. That was that was Billy Glasscock before. So these are 2 new titles essentially. So Brandon Harris was the assistant director, or was the director of recruiting. He's now moving to the GM. John Michael Jones was the assistant director of player personnel. He's moving to director of player personnel. Billy Glasscock was the director of player personnel for Texas. So all of this, it's kind of new nomenclature, but I would challenge people. This is not exactly like an NFL GM. If you have that picture in your head, that's not what this is. College football is not the pros. This is going to be a top-down organization, and everybody supports what Steve Sarkisian wants to do. He is the leader of recruiting. He is the leader of the team. He's the leader of the coaching staff. That's how college football works. Everything else, people can say, well, I want more of this or that. But Sark's been doing this way for the last 3 years, and he's had success. He's not changing just because the people, somebody says, oh, well, you should have a general manager. That's not what he's doing.
It's just, a role to, as you said, to be able to, give a little bump. But you need these positions, CJ. You got to have them. You have to have a front office these days with all of the, new roles and new things you have to keep up with. And that's why the general manager kind of oversees, to me, those other 3, make sure they're all working in concert, whether it's the player personnel, the recruiting operations. And Brandon Harris is probably the point to report back to Sark to make sure everything is being handled the way it needs to be done. And that's just like, anybody that's a general manager, you kind of know how you operate. But to Bobby's point, the alpha is Sark, and it works all under him.
Yeah, definitely. I think you either adapt to the times with recruiting or you get left in the dust. We've seen it not only with position group NIL collectives or whatever, to the transition to full football team program collectives to an entire athletic department collectives. And so that's kind of the new era now, as we're seeing a general manager alongside a director of player personnel and director of recruiting, director of recruiting operations as well. So this is going to be really the next step for recruiting with Texas. I'm interested again to see just how it's defined by Sarkisian, because that's going to give a little bit of a better understanding of what the day-to-day objective and ideas are going to be for all 4 of these promotions within the Texas staff. I do like that they stayed within house. I think that Texas has a lot of momentum right now on the recruiting trail, and they've certainly had a lot of success over the last 3 cycles. So that's encouraging to me.
Yeah, agreed. And we talked, I know Rod has mentioned before that, Brandon Harris had a chance to go work for the LA Rams in the NFL and kind of, turn that down. Sean McVay, everybody wants to be on that elevator with the Sean McVay escalator of your career, but he stayed. And I think, you wonder if that's when, Billy Glasscock moving to Ole Miss, that Sark felt like, okay, we can let him go. We have somebody who's ready to ascend to that role. We've got a good group. You mentioned John Michael Jones, 10 years in the program. Taylor Searles has been here for a while with this program. And, it's a group that knows Texas football, knows Sark, and knows what the direction of the program is.
I don't have any problem with this move from Steve Sarkisian. I think it goes to show sometimes people overthink opportunities like this or see them as differently than others. I will say this, and Ray Peters mentioned something. Is he the general manager of the Texas football program, or is he the general manager of recruiting and player personnel staff?
That's what I think he is. That's what I would guess.
That's a good distinction there, Ray. I don't know if they're going to actually make that distinction. On a grand perspective, Sark already has what I would call a chief of staff, so to speak. So maybe this is just rearranging within the personnel department itself. And that may be a way to look at it.
Yeah, because Brandon, as I say, I think Brandon Harris, as Ray points out, this is for the personnel staff. This is your roster construction, as CJ said. Brandon is the chief there and in charge, reports back to Sark, and then he oversees the other 3 and reports back. And this is I mean, this is what we talk about. If you work in any office space or business, you understand you need to have, segments of your business, and because the boss can't talk to all those people. You need one person that you talk to from that department that reports back to you and you trust. I mean, that's really how that works. And, Sark, that's his person. He does have a chief of staff. He obviously reports back to, working with his coaches. And, that's your kind of your lineup of who you're dealing with. But, he can't be everything to everybody all the time. That's why you need people in charge of each department.
I like that.
All right, guys, any other chats, super chats, conversations we need to have tonight on this Tuesday night live stream as we're watching Texas basketball get their heads handed to them a little bit?
I've purposely not said anything. They look like
Yeah, their offense. No bueno, guys. No bueno. Coming off that TCU game, you're hoping this would be a strong home performance. It has not been. TCU, I mean, Iowa State is built on defense. They're an elite defensive team with TJ Otzenberger, but this has been a really bad offensive performance for the Longhorns through the first, going on 30 minutes of basketball right now. They have 31 points. But, guys, good stuff tonight. The Sark's news conference will obviously bring a new, fresh set of conversations tomorrow. I know Coffee and Football tomorrow morning will be a lot about what goes on overnight and previewing that. The availability 10:15 tomorrow, CJ, or 11? What is our number tomorrow?
11 a.m. Sarkisian will be talking about the 2024 signees as well as the additions and movements inside the Texas recruiting department. So looking forward to that, and I'll have some notes immediately with Bobby as well as on Texas football right after.
And I know, Bobby, that'll be a conversation ongoing tomorrow on Texas football. The stories that come out of what Sark says tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. That plus, I want to dig a little bit. I think there's something I want to dig a little bit more on Brandon Harris and John Michael Jones, et cetera, in that situation. I also want to dig a little bit on this Michigan situation. There's something there. I think there's going to be something there. I don't know what yet. But we all know that Kenneth Grant followed Steve Sarkisian and Dan Lanning the day that Michigan's strength and conditioning coach left. You can't think that this isn't another chink in the armor for Michigan. So that's going to be topical, because I will say this, and I've said it several times, Aaron and CJ, I think Texas is a defensive tackle or two away from being as talented as anybody. That's how close they are.
I think you're right about that. I think
they add one or two.
Look out.
Yeah.
Look out. All right, guys. Great stuff. Appreciate it tonight. Texas Electricity Ratings. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, with all the questions. Ray Peters and all the super chats. Guys, it's been fun on a Tuesday night. We'll go watch the end of this Texas basketball game. Coffee and Football tomorrow at 8. Sark's news conference at 11 o'clock. All be covered on Texas Football, on TexasFootball.com, and all the social media conversations as well with Bobby, CJ, and the crew. Good stuff tonight, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, everybody.
Go.